This week is all about how cells use energy, how they process energy transforming from one form to another. So energy is our theme this week, and we call all of the metabolic processes that go on in a cell, everything that needs energy, everything the cell is doing with that energy, basically, bioenergetics. The movement of energy through living organisms is bioenergetics. Why do cells need energy? What are they doing with it, right? Well, cells require energy to stay alive. A lot of that energy cells are using is going towards maintaining homeostasis, maintaining a constant internal environment, so that way their chemical processes in that internal environment can be carried out properly. Cells need energy to build new cells if they're a multicellular organism, to replace those dead or damaged cells, right? That takes energy to build up new cells. Building up and breaking apart molecules can take energy, right? We need to do that because we need to replace damaged proteins, or we need to build new molecules. We need to build the signaling molecule, right? We're constantly building up and breaking down molecules inside of our cells. That takes energy. Moving stuff around the cell. Remember that little walking guy that we saw moving along the cytoskeleton? Every single step that little protein takes energy. Building new organelles takes energy, right? Building up molecules to make up that new phospholipid layer that make up a lot of the organelles. Building up phospholipid molecules takes energy. And again, a lot of it just maintaining homeostasis. Homeostasis is life. No homeostasis, chemical reactions can't happen. Cells aren't alive. Okay, so a lot of energy just goes towards maintaining constant internal environment. Pumping solutes around, like we saw last week with active transport. That is a huge part of maintaining homeostasis. So we need lots of energy. Cells need a lot of energy. But like, okay, cool, we need energy. I kind of have a sense what energy is, but like, what is it though? Right? So I like to think of energy like currency, like money, right? You can have lots of different types of money. You can have Bitcoin, you can have Canadian money, you can have US money, you can have the yen, you can have a euro, right? It can take many different forms. You can have cash versus you can use a credit card, right? But the whole point of it is that you can use that money to do things, okay? And you can use it for many different things. You can spend your money on getting some food delivered. You can use your money to go on a trip. You can use your money to pay your rent, right? Everything in our normal everyday society takes money to do, right? And one thing that is unique to both money and energy is that every time you transform it from one form to another, let's say we're traveling to Europe and we want to exchange some of our dollars for euros, that transformation of money comes at a cost. There's usually a fee associated with exchanging currency, right? Same thing for energy. But really at the core of this, in our capitalistic society, money is how we stay alive. Money buys us the food that we need. It keeps us housed in a shelter. Money gives us the power to purchase transportation, to get to our job, to get to our education, to do whatever we're doing, right? Money is how we stay alive in our society, okay? And money is basically energy for cells. So cells use energy like money, right? And they can use energy in many different forms, and they're constantly exchanging energy between these forms. So here are some common forms of energy that cells are using, that living organisms are using. They'll often store energy in the form of chemical bonds, and then release that energy to do work, to do stuff within the cell by breaking up those bonds. We can transfer energy from one molecule to another. So we'll talk about later how we transfer the energy that's stored in the bonds of glucose to another molecule, ATP, that's a little bit more usable and accessible to the cell for a wider variety of reactions. Some organisms can go through photosynthesis, which uses solar energy to build up sugar, okay? Animal cells, we can't do photosynthesis. We don't have access to using that energy, that solar energy. So we can transform the energy in the bonds of glucose into ATP, and then we can use that energy that's in ATP to do stuff, okay? That chemical energy stored in the bonds of ATP, we can convert that to kinetic energy, to move vesicles around the cell, to contract proteins, right? To build up other molecules, to move solutes against their concentration gradient. Everything the cell is doing to maintain homeostasis requires ATP. Cells are also able to use the potential energy of electrochemical gradients. We talked about this a little bit when we talked about neurons and how they function in terms of active transport, but we'll see this again when we talk about cellular respiration. The idea that we can concentrate in a molecule on one side of a membrane, that's a form of stored up potential energy, kind of like charging up a battery, right? So we'll see that potential energy of electrochemical gradients again towards the end of our cellular respiration section. Okay, so what forms of energy are not useful to cells? So there's many different forms that energy can take, but cells are not very good at using thermal energy, the energy of heat, right, to make it into ATP. Okay, so we can't capture heat from the environment and use that energy to transform it into a usable form of ATP. We can't do that. We're also not very good at converting kinetic energy, the energy of movement, which is kind of related to thermal energy, but the kinetic energy, the energy of movement, we can't transform that into ATP. Okay, so cells are really good at transforming chemical energy and potential energy of gradients, electrochemical gradients, into energy, but not so much thermal or kinetic energy. Those are not very useful forms of energy for living organisms. So when we talk about bioenergetics, a lot of times we're talking about metabolism, and metabolism is a term that's used slightly differently in everyday language than how we use it in biology. So you might hear somebody say, oh, my metabolism's super fast, I'm able to process food really, really quickly. Yeah, that's kind of right, but really, catabolism is the sum of all of those chemical reactions that are going on in a cell. Some of building up and breaking down molecules, right? Some of those reactions take energy, some of those reactions produce energy, okay? So we break up metabolism into two major portions, what we call the anabolic and what we call the anabolic pathways and the catabolic pathways. So anabolic pathways use energy to build molecules. So usually anabolic pathways are things like taking smaller molecules and connecting them together to make larger molecules. Catabolism or catabolic processes create energy or release energy for the cell to use. So these are typically taking larger molecules and breaking them apart. Okay, so all of those different types of reactions happening within a cell, all of those combined together are what we call metabolism. So cells make energy through the process of catabolism. We'll focus on specifically glucose catabolism later in cellular respiration, but I like to kind of think of like catabolism like going to work, turning your time and expertise into money, right? Cells are able to turn the energy stored in chemical bonds into ATP, a usable form, right? So we're converting the energy stored in the chemical bonds, especially covalent bonds when electrons are shared. That'll be important later. We turn the energy of covalent bonds, the energy of those electrons being shared, when we break that bond, that creates energy that the cell can use to make ATP. We say that catabolic reactions are exergonic, meaning they release energy. Remember, ex meaning outside, gonic in this sense is referencing energy, right? So exergonic reactions, catabolic reactions are releasing energy for the cell to use or to transform that energy into another form. Once we've released that energy, what are we going to do with it? So typically cells are going to release energy and transform it in the process of catabolism into ATP. Anabolism, now we're going to take that ATP and do stuff with it, do useful stuff with it, right? So kind of like how we take our paycheck, we spent our time and energy going to work, right? Now we can use that paycheck to keep ourselves alive, right? To buy stuff for ourselves or to buy other people's time, like we go to the doctor, right? To keep us alive. It's kind of what cells are doing in anabolism or anabolic processes. The energy generated during catabolism is then used to do stuff to keep the cell alive, like moving solutes against their concentration gradient to maintain homeostasis or to establish an electrochemical gradient, or to move stuff around the cell, right? Like that little vesicle walking around the cytoskeleton. That all takes energy, and they're all required, all of these processes are required for cells to remain alive. So typically we say anabolic reactions are endergonic, meaning inside energy. We invest energy into those reactions for them to occur. Okay, they do not occur unless we invest energy into them. But the big idea here is that energy is just changing form. We're converting energy from one form to another. Okay. So this is getting kind of big and out there, but one of the laws of thermodynamics is that the energy in the universe is constant. I know that sounds kind of like, ooh, feel your vibrations, the universe is talking to you. No, but energy cannot be created or destroyed, but we can change the form that energy takes. Okay, so that's basically what it means. So we can't really generate new energy, but we can change forms of energy. Okay, we can cause that energy to change form from one form to another. So like in photosynthesis, plants are converting solar energy into chemical energy. Okay, we're changing form. In animals, what we're going to do is we're going to take the chemical energy in food and we can convert it into the energy of things like heat to keep our bodies warm, or we can convert it into kinetic energy to move, right? To contract our muscles, that's kinetic energy, energy of movement, right? And we can convert that chemical energy in food into another type of chemical energy in other bonds of molecules, right? So we can either create or destroy energy. But every time we transform energy, let's say we transform the stored chemical energy in ATP into the energy of movement, right? We're going to contract some muscles and we're going to move. Every time energy is transformed, there's a little bit that's taken off the top. A little bit is quote unquote lost to living organisms in the form of heat. So every time we transform energy from one form to another, a small percentage, sometimes not so small, but a percentage of that energy, every time it's transformed, is going to leave the organism as heat. Okay, so it's going to radiate out from the organism to the environment. We say it's lost because living organisms can't use heat to generate more ATP. So I kind of, again, I like to think of this little tax that's taken off, this little loss of energy, of heat energy to the environment. I like to think of that as like the fee that's charged when you're converting currencies, right? Or maybe taxes that are taken off of your paycheck, right? Or if there's a fee associated with transferring your money from one bank to another. That's basically what's happening. We're losing a little bit of that as kind of like a tax for transforming energy from one form to another, and that's usually lost as heat. Heat is a form of energy. Thermal energy is lost to the environment, so it radiates out of the organism.